coming at you week 11, I believe it is, Josh. And it's crazy because there's only a couple of games left for most teams in college football. This weekend went about as we expected, although we did pick Texas to win the game. I'm going to take a victory lap later on how close we predicted the Alabama Ole Miss game. We'll get into that later. But I guess off the jump, Oregon, Washington, give me your thoughts. Let's get at it.
Yeah, I've been trying to keep an eye on this one as best I can. There's so many games going on at once. I tweeted out earlier that North Carolina's defense paints with a crayon. If they paint with a crayon, then the defenses that Oregon and Washington roll out, I don't think I'm allowed to do what they say with a crayon on Twitter, or at least tweet about it and stay on the platform. I don't know with the Elon Musk world. It's been really herky-jerky. It feels like anytime either one of the teams wants to really do something, it works. Oregon's had a lot of success running the ball and then throwing the ball. There've been a couple times where they'd run 4 verts and 3 of the guys are uncovered by 15 yards over the top of the defense. It's been sort of astounding. The one thing that slowed down Oregon is that Bo Nix went out with a bound up ankle at one point in the game, and then that sort of stalled their offense. In fact, this game, I don't think it'll spoil people, but I'll give you an extra 10 seconds. Just ended. So Bo Nix was trying to bring them back to win at the end. Really kind of a weird result with a lot of stoppage for referee stuff. And Bo Nix short hopped one at the end of the game there, but it's not really on him so much because they had the lead for most of it. Again, he had the injury, came out right around the time it looked like they were going to put him away. And then he just couldn't do enough there at the end of the game. I think probably still playing pretty banged up. But yeah, I haven't really bought into the idea that Oregon was a true top 10 team. You can see the speed and athleticism in this game, certainly defensively and offensively, especially offensively. Washington is not a great football team either, to be honest. I will avoid pulling one more punch before I hand it back to you, which is, honestly, when I watch the Pac-12, I feel like I'm watching a G5 conference. Just in terms of my eyes, there are a couple teams. Oregon is one that stand out from their athleticism and just overall speed and talent. And there's a reason that they score a lot more than other teams. But the overall level of play it's just not good. And it's really, really hard to evaluate. And there's been such a bubble that I think we have a hard time figuring out how to make a right impression about them.
Yeah, and if you remember, Michigan canceled the UCLA game, so we lost a data point there. Oregon got absolutely pummeled by Georgia, but everybody wanted a discount. It's almost, Josh, it's almost like they got beat so bad that it made everybody discount it. Like if that was a 2-touchdown game, people would be like, you lost soundly, game over, but almost so bad that nobody wanted to credit it. The Pac-12 is 3-7 versus Power 5 opponents plus Notre Dame as of last week. And Oregon's opponents, outside of the UCLA team they beat, the teams they beat's average record was 3-6. And to your point about it being a G5 conference, this is why we're so against auto bids in the 12-team playoff world, because we're about to see UCLA and USC leave the Pac-12. Texas and Oklahoma leave the Big 12. They're backfilling. They've already backfilled one round of essentially G5 teams. Now they're backfilling with teams that didn't make the first cut. So these are second cut G5 teams that are going to be in these conferences. And so you've got the teams that were like the bottom of the conference before, which were G5 quality, plus new G5s. And it really is going to be that way. In the Pac-12, I don't like to get into this too much. We're seeing it with Texas right now losing, although they're making a game of it. The overall talent rankings of teams doesn't mean that much to me, because a team can get in isolation because the team can not play up to their talent level, like Alabama this year, like Texas. But when you have a conference that is in the 50s, 60s, 70s in terms of overall talent, then just a team in the 30s can look dominant when in reality they're not playing anybody more than a G5.
Yeah. I don't really know a more positive way to spin it, honestly. And to your point, when we go into the playoff expansion world, which by all accounts is supposed to happen in a few years, I think people are going to have a hard time adjusting to the realities of that, even more so because Oklahoma and Texas leave the Big 12, and it's very easy to say, well, Texas is down. Currently, they're down 17-10 to TCU. That game's still very much in question, even with 3.5 left. But Oklahoma and Texas are still consistently one of the best teams in the Big 12. And Oklahoma's won that conference more often than not in recent years. You take them out of the mix, and those are just two solid teams. Texas is a solid team for the Big 12 this year. But in general, two teams that are usually at the top of that conference, they're not going to be in the discussion. So there's going to be years where, Oklahoma has just ran away with the conference, that those teams aren't there anymore. So somebody else, Kansas State, may win it with one loss. And they may be nowhere near on par with where Oklahoma had been in a year where Oklahoma got blown out in the playoff. So it's going to be interesting. It's definitely going to be harder to evaluate. Benjamin V said that your audio is cutting out, Daniel, again. So I'll touch on some super chats if you want to take a second. I don't know if there's anything you can look at with it. Let's see here. Mike Farino said, how's it going, y'all? I almost forgot to tune in tonight. How's it been going? With a really generous super chat again. We always appreciate it, Mike. I think things are going pretty well. I'm not quite Gary Danielson level, though. If we recorded 2 days ago, I probably would have been a little worse. But we'll make it through tonight. Always a fun evening with college football. I have the house to myself today, so it's been pretty good. Benjamin V with another super chat saying, "Whoops, I'm missing the live show last week." I'll take the super chat as a mea culpa. Paul Dodd said Sean Clifford or cranberry sauce, but from a can. That's a more difficult one. I'm going to out myself a little bit as a Southerner, but I'm not really a huge fan of cranberry sauce. I think my wife would be all in on the cranberry sauce. I know there's a big culture of people that are like cranberry sauce from a can is actually the cranberry sauce. And now some of you will really take offense to that, but I think it's sort of a what you got served at Thanksgiving situation in terms of what you like more. I feel like Mike Leach right now. David Bonhard, great show, boys. Go blue. I appreciate it, David. I appreciate the super chat. Obviously a big win for Michigan today. And, again, we've talked about this a lot, and we may touch on it later. Like, Michigan has some faults, okay? J.J. McCarthy was 8 of 17, 129 yards passing. They continue to win. They're winning against a not very good schedule. It is what it is. The 17 for 129 stat line isn't great. They're running about 6.5 yards per attempt again against a bad defense. And I don't quite know what to do with them because all they do is win. Defensively, they're playing really good. Offensively, they got a lot of explosiveness. They still have a good run game. It's not a complete team offensively. And the competition's not good enough for me to really be able to completely evaluate the defense either on a week-to-week basis. So I'm going to continue to put them very high because they're undefeated. I still think they're a very good team. It's not like there's a lot of teams that jump off the page at you this year. But I thought it was a good win. I didn't feel like the win was quite as good as the score personally. But all you got to do is keep winning. And it doesn't really matter how good your win is or isn't. If you're Michigan, if you win out, you're going to be first or second in the playoff rankings. You're definitely going to be in. And even if you don't win out with one loss, there's a decent shot you make the playoffs anyway. So just keep getting W's, and that's all that really matters. All right, let me see. Any more super chats? Yep. So I think Texas, if I'm trying to keep up with where we're at with everything. Yep. TCU just got a first down to let them put the game away. So other big results, North Carolina took a field goal to take the lead against Wake Forest. That's been an interesting one to watch. Florida State thumping Syracuse. I'll give Daniel a shout out here. Daniel has been of the opinion that Syracuse was a pretender from day one. That's not like I disagreed with him, but it's kind of funny in some of the situations that Syracuse was being counted as a ranked win for Clemson. A lot of Clemson fans were sort of beating their chest about all the ranked wins they have. Yeah, NC State and Syracuse, they were fool's gold, and we all knew it. And at some point, you just got to accept it and realize it.
27-21 at home. They
Stephen,
beat Syracuse. Yeah.
Stephen Light with a super chat, and then I'll read this one. Then I'll let you jump in and answer it since you seem to be back up. You cannot eat cranberry sauce from a can from New England. That should get you 10 years of hard labor if that ends up on a family Thanksgiving plate. Thanks again for another Saturday night. You wanna respond to that, Daniel? Do you have a stance on cranberry sauce, pro, against, and your stance on it being from a can?
I consider real cranberry sauce a different food from canned cranberry sauce, and both are acceptable. They're just you just have to accept them for what they are. I love the can lines on the gel, but I we've probably talked enough about cranberry sauce on College Football Nerds show tonight. Josh, let's talk a little bit about. Can we talk about Florida? Because everybody's like, look, I'm not super high on LSU. I think that they beat Alabama at home, and Alabama's road Alabama, and they're just not great this year. Um, I think LSU is decent, but I think the notion that LSU first game under a new coach, first game under a new quarterback, loses by an extra point on a neutral site to Florida State. Everybody's been using that against him, like, oh, they suck. They lost to Florida State. Florida State's one score away from having a win over Clemson and being like 8-2. So that's all I'm going to say about that.
Yeah. I mean, they do have 3 losses outside that game, right? But I am with you. I mean, Florida State's a good team. I think one of the problems is that people are having a hard time sort of wrapping their head around the fact that there's a lot of parity, and it's hard to make it through the season without losses this year. And yeah, I don't know. LSU's a hard one to judge. I don't know if we want to. Maybe this is a good time to talk about that game, LSU and Arkansas, and then also just sort of evaluating them as a team, given their schedule, what they've won, and what they've lost.
Yeah, I mean, and we can talk about it right as until we can get into this Texas TCU game. Um, the fact that they barely beat Arkansas today with Arkansas's basically third string quarterback because their second string quarterback's so bad. I don't know what that game looks like with KJ Jefferson, because the drop off from Jefferson to Hornsby string is massive, and offensively they can it's got to frustrate you if you're an Alabama fan. See porous Arkansas defense shut them down. But my thing about parity and my thing about teams that have had a surprise this year, and I'm going to make some people mad because this is going to be a big win for them, but like TCU, like LSU, I think they're reflective of other teams not being as good this year as they normally are. And so somebody's got to win those games. Somebody's got to fill that gap. And come postseason, they're going to get shocked a little bit. Somebody said it in the chat that TCU is going to get killed in the playoffs. If TCU's got to play Georgia in the first round, it's going to be bad.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with you. Yeah, that LSU game was interesting though, and I think they get something of a deserved pass for losing at the beginning of the season when they had a lot of transfers. They weren't the same team. Now I think a loss is a loss to a certain degree, but it was clearly they weren't all together, and it was kind of a weird game that they lost it anyway. The more troubling stuff is that Tennessee just destroyed them, right? And that was a weird game, as I've said many times, because their offensive line lost a bunch of guys that day or that morning or during the game, and they didn't have any depth, so they were just crippled. But again, their offense just sort of laid out an absolute clunker, and they've been like that off and on. Auburn also almost entirely shut them down offensively. So, it's tough. I'm with you. There's something to the fact that Alabama may not be a particularly good team. KJ Jefferson is probably one of the more valuable players in the country, given how much he matters for Arkansas. Kind of makes me think he's probably underrated in a lot of people's view overall, given how different Arkansas looks without him. And yeah, they lost to Liberty with him, but his shoulder was banged up. He wasn't even remotely the same player. That's why they didn't start him. He's healthier now than he was then. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, the reality is when you try to make these judgment calls and these transitive property things, it's hard to evaluate. So it looks like the TCU game with Texas has wrapped up. So do you want to touch on that a little bit? I can see our numbers jumping up a little bit as all the TCU Texas fans or people watching that game get on.
I was really surprised, and this is something that Quinn Ewers is not a great quarterback, but to only have 10 points in this game is pretty shocking. And I'm going to play around with my audio a little bit, so I'm going to let you kind of take it. But I was surprised at how bad they looked with him at quarterback for 3 quarters in this game.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I took a lot of heat early in the year because I was skeptical of viewers and people called me a Texas hater. Look, guys, when I call out stuff like that, sometimes I'm wrong, but usually when I take something that might sound like a hot take and I throw it out there, I usually have a pretty strong feeling it's right, and I'm usually not wrong when I do it. I don't go out on a limb like that lightly, and I certainly don't think I was wrong to have that opinion of Ewers in this one. It was really weird. I mean, Duggan and Ewers both were 4.3, 4.4 yards per attempt. The conversation going into this game was that TCU had maybe the best offense in college football. They did almost nothing. Kendre Miller ended up with 6.6 yards per carry, in large part because he had a 75-yard carry. Really, outside that one play, everything was torture for TCU, and it's just so happened to be in a game where Texas did even less. I think you can question a number of different things in the game. Bijan Robinson only had 12 carries. Roschon Johnson only had 5. They threw 39 times, and it's not like they were trying to come from behind. I mean, it was a 17-10 game, so I'm not sure why they let the balance get that out of whack 2-1. I think part of the answer there is TCU is being very aggressive, but on both sides, I think you saw both teams show a lot of weaknesses. TCU offensively, very athletic team. We talked about before, they've got a lot of different options. They've got guys with size, they've got guys with speed, and I think for the most part over the course of the year, it seemed like they were just sort of out athleting people. It's a similar conversation to what we were having about the Pac-12 when we first started up this live chat. It's difficult to evaluate some of these conferences right now because they play in such a silo, and there's things that they're doing, this like Kansas TCU bubble where I can't really tell if they're that fast or if the defenses are playing are that slow. And Texas has been herky-jerky all year, but athletically they've looked really good. Bijan Robinson's looked dominant. And in this game, TCU did not, I mean, they certainly could tell that they had speed, but the physicality from Texas was a real problem, and you could tell. I mean, they just could not really handle it at the line of scrimmage more often than not. They couldn't handle it downfield and press coverage. They got one big bust for a touchdown. They had a big run where I don't know that Texas's safeties are overly fast. It got back to our prediction talking about how Texas has struggled with teams with finesse. I didn't think it'd be that low scoring. And when you talk about the win, why did TCU win the game? Because their defense was able to confuse Texas. Ewers looked atrocious. His footwork went to hell. I've often said that I never really felt like he could come off a primary read, but it seemed in this game like things were even on another level, because even when he was throwing to his primary read, he was off the mark more often than not. His ability to hit the deep ball at the beginning of the year was pretty darn good, and now he couldn't, it doesn't feel like he could put water in the ocean. I don't know. I don't really know what's going on. So, yeah, I think it's a good win for TCU. They stay undefeated. From a playoff projection standpoint, let's assume that they went out the rest of the way and they go undefeated. I don't know how much to take from it, but this does not give me a lot of confidence for TCU if they play somebody like Georgia in the playoff. I just don't see, because anything Texas does, Georgia is just way better. Defensively, they're way better. And then offensively, they are more efficient and better in every regard. Or you're going to have to play Ohio State the same way. Ohio State is a better defensive team than Texas. They are a tremendously better offensive team than Texas. I know they're undefeated. If I had to put someone in the playoff, I would. I don't know that they, from a quality perspective, necessarily deserve to be there. I don't know that they're gonna hold their place. It feels a lot like those Oklahoma teams from recent years. Only, honestly, this feels even worse. I just feel like the Big 12 and the Pac-12 are not overly good, and things are being just sort of hidden. I mean, maybe you can disagree with me, Daniel, but that's my take. If you got your audio situation figured out.
What I just hopped on. Tell me what your take is again.
It's essentially the fact, like, TCU had really been riding the fact that they were this great offensive juggernaut, right? And I've said their defense was suspect. And yes, they showed up tonight, but I felt like they showed up more to do with the fact that Texas's offense was just janky and Ewers couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. This game did not give me any actual confidence that if they show up at a playoff, that they're going to be any more competitive than Oklahoma was in that run where they were just getting run out of the building week after week.
Well, and I don't know if you touched on it, but the 2 touchdowns that TCU scored were busts. Like, running back got the edge, got 75-yard play. They had nothing the whole game until then, and then they had the coverage bust for the second touchdown. Look, I think that he was a good story this year, and I'm happy to eat my crow, but it's just different. And Georgia's had their ugly moments this year. Like, I think that the only prayer somebody has of winning a national championship that's not named Georgia this year is going to be that the winner of that Ohio State-Michigan game. I just think that's the only shot, because in terms of talent and the ability, because people forget that this is not just can you jump up and snap a good team. It's that team's got a month to prepare for you. And these teams are on a whole other level. We've seen it in the playoffs almost every year where somebody gets a month to prepare and they just wreck people. And I mean, yeah, I think that TCU could scheme up some stuff. You give them a month too, but man, I have a hard time. I think it would look a lot like the Georgia game last year.
Yeah. Yeah, I tend to agree with you. So we got some more super chats. I'll throw one up. M Funky Fudge 11 said Florida dismissed their most talented player, and suddenly their def seems to have improved. What's up with that? Do you think it was a locker room issue? Yeah, they played South Carolina. And South Carolina was a bad team, and I feel like they've regressed. Do you want to talk about that for a minute?
I can say this because my wife doesn't watch us. It's funny. Shout out to some of my wife's friends that do watch us. And she got some wins, and I'm kind of the Eeyore that's like the pendulum's about to swing, and they were living on borrowed time. And we saw tonight against Auburn why A&M lost to South Carolina, right? And talk about this all the time, where teams look good when they hit it. Like you say, oh, they've improved. They've hit a stretch of teams that aren't very good, and that's the issue. It's pretty bad. Their defense has been okay in spurts this year, but offensively they're pretty bad. Josh, talk to me a little bit. Talk to me a little bit about Alabama, Ole Miss. I guess some teams that have a chance at the playoffs. I think that Alabama today, because if you just look at the 31-24, you picked 31-27. The game was 30-24. We were all over this game, and we both said Road Alabama was going to show up, and they did. They showed up. Let's do the exercise, Josh. What's the score of that game if you swap the rosters? Coaching staff stay the same, swap the rosters. Who wins and what's the score?
I feel like Kiffin would have won that game 40-13 with their scheme and the way they're coaching this year.
Yeah, I think that, the thing, and this is what I really want you to unpack a little bit. For me, there's all these athletes that Alabama has, but if you watch the scoring drives that Ole Miss had, they were creative, they were set up, they exploited weaknesses that they found on tape that Alabama had. When Eli Ricks got hurt, they knew exactly how to pick on Terrion Arnold. On the flip side, all of the points and all of the first downs, even for Alabama, felt so hard. Everything that Ole Miss did right felt like it was calculated and intentional and part of a flow. Alabama did, to me, it just feels like points in this offense are painfully hard to come across.
Yeah. There were a number of things schematically that were kind of amazing to me. First, I don't think Bryce Young is healthy. I'll, take the heat or credit or however you want to put it for being the one that's been pretty critical of him to a certain degree on Twitter in terms of his just current performance. There are a couple levels to that. One, he has certain limitations. I think he's too short. And I'll go ahead and put this on record right now. I won't be surprised if he slides in the draft, and I think he can have some serious issues in the NFL because I think he's very short. He may be like 5'9", and there are certain things defenses can do to attack him, particularly interior blitzes, that they can't adjust to. And what that's done is it's taken a whole section of their playbook off the table. And without that there, they don't really have a way to respond. I might try to throw a still image up if I can figure out how to do it in just a minute. Maybe I can do that right now if I can, while Daniel's trying to continue to figure out what's going on his end. There were a couple plays in this game. Well, no, I can't do it because of the way we've got access to this. So that's a bummer. But there were a couple plays in the game, I will say, where they were crossing routes over the middle of the field. There's one in particular where Bryce Young sort of lobs it up. It was late in the game on third down. He lobs it up to the running back in the face of pressure. I think it was McClellan, number 2, off to the right side of the field, and he can't catch it and make a completion. But the thing is that it was an inside pressure, and they have the slot receiver that's running across the drag route right over the middle of the field. The correct way to run that play is when the linebacker comes down, it clears the middle of the field. It was straight man coverage. So you have a receiver with a trailing guy, and he's got him by about 5 to 7 yards. And so you should just hit the receiver. And I noted when Bryce Young lets the ball go, he's coming free with no one around him. And for most tall quarterbacks, he's going to dump the ball off and he'll just run for a touchdown. That's the read on a blitz. You replace the blitz. I think Bryce Young's too short. He can't throw those plays on a consistent basis. It's sort of taken a lot of his playbook off. And a lot of people are saying, compare him to Tua. I think Tua might be 3 or 4 inches taller, like 4 inches taller. And if you think about that, like think a 6'4" quarterback versus a 6-foot quarterback, Tua's quite a bit taller than Young. The inability to run that play means teams can bring in interior blitzes. And if you can bring interior blitzes, you create pressure, and you also sort of create an avalanche on the run game because now you're just constantly filling gaps and attacking with impunity. The linebackers do not ever, even if they sit, they don't have to worry about dropping back into coverage. They're just waiting to figure out what gap they want to attack. They're not worrying anything behind them. And so that's sort of the first part of it. And it really creates a lot of problems for Alabama in terms of what they can do schematically. Now, you take that a step further. What Alabama was trying to do at times was a little baffling because it's clear that Bryce Young has shoulder issues. Now, despite me saying he has limitations, and I will say I think LSU last year really exposed those problems in the game where they nearly beat them. And I think everyone since then has started to really kind of adopt that blueprint. A couple exceptions. I think Arkansas didn't quite figure it out. That was like a game or two later that year. Georgia, the first time, didn't really apply those principles. Everybody sort of looked at those examples, and then particularly Georgia in the championship game, because, the SEC title was the week after the last week of the season. Then they had time to prepare, watch film, and everybody sort of adopted it. Now that everybody knows that game, it's harder, but they can still do things. The problem is with his shoulder being bad, there are routes he can't throw. There's a lot of, if you can't throw middle of the field, right, you got to throw to the outside. And so a lot of the throws they want to make are out routes or corner routes to the far side of the field. And there were a couple throws in particular in that game where they were throwing like a corner or just a flat throw to the far boundary. And if he had to throw to the far boundary, the ball was inevitably somewhat short. Like I know one of them was like a good 10 yards short. The ball was always wobbly. He doesn't have the velocity. And so what you end up with, I think, really is a situation where they have to move him around. And if he can throw with anticipation, he's a very smart quarterback. He understands the offense. He understands timing. He has a very good sense of when players are going to come free. But he has to be able to see it to do it. He has to be able to throw through the window, and it has to be close enough that he can put enough velocity on it. Those are a lot of limitations. And Alabama took about a half to figure that out. And somewhere in the second half, I know there's one touchdown play that they kept gushing over, but that was a play where they rolled it. He ended up, scrambling and rolling right, and then he threw over top a defender. So it's a lob that's more about timing, touch, understanding of anticipation, not about arm talent and zip. If he had to throw a zip throw that whole game, it was really spotty whether he completed it. Excuse me, guys. So on the whole, you end up with an Alabama offense that's pretty limited. And again, those problems are really, really tough on the run game too, because those interior blitzes sort of fill up gaps. And then defensively, it was kind of interesting because Alabama came out. They came out and with 3 defensive linemen for the first time in a while. They've been running sort of this 2-4-5 set. And it's like a nickel, but they only have 2 down linemen. They're playing with 2 edge linebackers and 2 inside linebackers. And late in the game against LSU, they got really gashed. And they got gashed in particular. We talked about this in our video, running the big video we ran talking about Skeen running what was essentially a 1-4-6. They had 1 defensive lineman. They had 4 linebackers in the field, and they were playing dime behind it. We never saw the 1-4-6, but instead it's like they shifted everything up. They started with what is more of a base nickel, 3 defensive linemen, 1 pass rusher. So they weren't using Turner and Anderson at the same time. That didn't really work because what happened, Ole Miss saw that alignment. They saw where the jack was, and they knew they could avoid Anderson. And Alabama's DNs and linebackers clearly aren't used to playing without 2 edge people, because when they would pitch the ball, the DN never had leverage, and the inside linebacker, which schematically was always Moody, they always had him outside of Anderson. So they had kind of their worst linebacker always chasing the play, and it was just going for huge yardage over and over again. Even if they didn't want to pitch it, they could fake the pitch and roll out, and they still knew they weren't going to have a pass rusher coming in on dart. The second half, they went back to more of a 2-4-5, but it was kind of, if you think from the LSU game, they went from a 2-4-5 to a 1-4-6. Here they went from what was essentially a 3-3-5 down to a 2-4-5, so staying a little bit heavier. And it was that shift, I think, that gave the most problems for Ole Miss. They really had a hard time offensively when Alabama put 2 edge players in the field. And I will say, I really actually put a lot of the blame there on Lane Kiffin. They ran the ball very effectively between the tackles when they tried in the second half against those looks. Again, Alabama's pretty light in those sets, but they kept trying to do the same misdirection stuff they started with that had been very effective, but against a different formation and different personnel, it wasn't anywhere near as effective. And I think they were kept it was like Kiffin kept trying to throw a receiver screen and trying to set up a shot play, and Alabama had switched to a formation that was designed to stop that. And they never really went back to bread and butter power runs. The couple times they did, Judkins got 10, 12 yards and a couple carries between the tackles. But for the most part, they kept trying to attack outside on the edge. And with Alabama's edge players, Turner and Anderson are both going to be first-round draft pick edge players. It's very, very hard to attack them on the edge. And so that game ended up getting away from them late. And I think it was a game that Alabama's coaching staff blew in the first half and Ole Miss's coaching staff blew in the second half. And then just sheer talent between those 2 things won out, and Alabama won it. But a lot of things to adjust for Alabama. Certainly a big missed opportunity for Ole Miss in that game. And I'm just gonna keep carrying on. I'm not sure where my buddy is, so I'll pick up on a couple of super chats. Josh, Daniel Bremner said, "Hey, college football nerds, love you guys. Watch all your videos, but after seeing UConn, do you think the SEC isn't the SEC?" I assume he's talking about the transitive win over Arkansas, where UConn beat Liberty today, and then Liberty beat Arkansas. Again, though, every week's different. Transitive property doesn't work out. And a lot of times those G5 teams get up for a big P5 game, and they will drop an FCS game or something the week after. That happens a lot. The other thing I will say is I think if KJ Jefferson had been healthy, they would have beaten Liberty quite badly. The reality is Jefferson with a bum shoulder was worse than what Hornsby was, and Hornsby against LSU could not move the ball at all at any point. So yeah, I mean, they just have a quarterback situation. I don't take a whole lot beyond it. I know there's a lot of chatter right now about where Bryce Young will be drafted, so I'll comment on that. I think he's going to be drafted in the first round. The reality is potential starting NFL quarterbacks are almost always going to be drafted in the first round. There aren't very many of them. If you want to talk about how far he's going to slide, the answer is, who are you going to take ahead of him? There's way too many teams that need to try to take a quarterback. And if there's a potential for him to be a good quarterback or even a serviceable quarterback, you've got to take a shot. And if he ends up being great, I mean, he has some really unique skill sets and you can't pass on him. But I'm beginning to increasingly think he is basically a Doug Flutie clone, and a crazy magician player that can make some of the most insane plays that you've ever seen. But he lacks a lot of the just stereotypical NFL traits that make a quarterback successful. And again, Doug Flutie spent several years in the CFL, did eventually play in the NFL and had some success, but certainly nothing like what he was in college. And I kind of fear that Bryce Young is headed to the same boat. And I think it is nothing more than height. I mean, he's just the shortest, flat out shortest high level quarterback I've seen. I think he's about 2 inches shorter. 2 inches shorter maybe than Kyler Murray, who's having his own problems in the NFL due to height. And I think Murray is more athletically gifted than Young. Not to say that Young isn't very gifted, but Murray is sort of probably, well, he did have the opportunity to play baseball just in terms of arm talent and just general athleticism.
Josh, I'm going to try to chime in a little bit. Let me know if my audio chops up again. This is my last shot. I'm using my headset only, no video. If it's still choppy, I'll quit and just go back to the chat. I think
sure.
that.
And do you want to? Yeah, go ahead.
Let me know. Does it sound pretty clear to y'all or not?
Yeah, I can understand you. It's better. I can understand the words you're saying, so that's the important part.
I think that the thing with Bryce Young is the good is so good that people don't appreciate the mundane and the fact that it's not there for him. When you see a 3 and out, a lot of times it's because he misses a wide open Jahmyr Gibbs who's open by 20 yards. When you see him go 3 and out, a lot of times it's because he holds the ball too long, and then people say, well, he's got no O-line protection. The O-line this year is so much better than it was last year and he just doesn't get to or just doesn't let the ball go. But then he'll go 2 drives where they'll go 3 and out back to back. He'll go, 0 for 6. And then he'll make some circus Houdini play, and everybody remembers that. And that's the concern I have. And it feels like to me like the people calling games don't want to call him out when he makes bad plays. They almost cover for him. Zone 6
Herb
Gibbs
Street.
isn't. Yeah, he did
Herb
last
Street
week.
Did that against an LSU. He kept saying he's not really having a great night. Well, he's being tough. There's one play in particular where he called where the ball came out of his hand wrong, and they kind of brushed that play aside. But it was this deep middle crosser to one of Alabama's receivers. I think it was 80. Just that play stuck out in my mind because I went back and looked at it. The dude was wide open, 40 yards down the field, probably scores, and the ball was thrown in the dirt 20 yards short. And they just kind of moved on quickly. So nobody really realized how serious that error was. But those in the passing game, if you are throwing errant missed passes to open guys, it is brutal for passing efficiency.
Yeah, I'm gonna bow out, Josh. It sounds like I'm still cutting out, and I don't want it to be just absolutely brutal for our podcast listeners.
You're fine. Really, it's cutting out slightly, but it's not as bad as it was. So Ace Man said, just tuning in after the Aggie game, and woof, this game proves without A Chain we are nothing offensively. I think that's a that's a good transition into something else. That Auburn Texas A&M game, which I had on in the corner of the screen, sort of looked like a snuff film. There wasn't a lot going on. Auburn was ineffective offensively. Texas A&M, I remember them hitting 9 passes in a row without a completion, and I think they went higher than that. And the scary thing is that Wegman was just inaccurate. It wasn't even just a route concept thing. And I turned the audio for a bit, and they were talking about how there's nothing interesting going on offensively. They were running like 4 verts concepts. There were no easy throws for Wegman. Nothing was being put in front of them. They were just asking receivers to go out and get a win. Muhammad did not play for them. They never announced why. Evan Stewart ended up getting banged up in the second half, and that really sort of broke them. And so you're already at this deficit. I think it's really clear. We've talked about for several years that a lack of quality receivers has been one of the biggest problems for Texas A&M. They finally found a couple, and then they lost them this year. And then Wegman regressed to what I can only describe as a pretty terrifying level if you're a Texas A&M fan. But on the other side of the ball, I thought it was interesting, sort of how things went for Auburn. I mean, they had a good bevy of backs. They've got a running quarterback. Quite frankly, I felt like they were way too cute because they could have leaned on the run, it seemed, and been more than effective enough to drive down the field, get some field goals, and win the game. And they had so many plays. There were cute plays, went for negative plays. And then they had so many just self-enforced stops that it kept them from being able to put that game away. And it ended up being a game where Texas A&M kicks an onside kick in the end of the game and recover. But, Auburn ran for 270 yards. They ran it 55 times, and they only threw it 13. So I understand, if you want to look at the box score, you'll say they didn't throw it that much. But what I'm telling you basically is a lot of those Robbie Ashford carries were actually passes. And I just, they started creatively with a run game, and then later on, I think they got too creative with the run game when they should have just been running power. And I think they probably would have put it away sooner. Yeah, that Texas A&M offense is in total free fall. The defense stuck around and fought. I'll give them credit. It's not good. 3-7, not good. Yeah, this is where it's going to get tough for me. Yum Yum said, thanks for powering through, Josh. Here's a few bucks for some cold meds. I appreciate it because if I'm going solo, my voice is not going to hold out very much longer. Excuse me, guys. Give me 1 second. Mike Farino asked, other than Ohio State losing by less than a score versus Michigan, did Tennessee just make the playoffs with Oregon's loss? I think that's sort of the question, right? The one game that we haven't talked about too much was Georgia, Mississippi State. I didn't think Georgia looked great. I know Daniel tweeted that at some point turnover Georgia is just who Georgia is, and that seems to be the case. They had a lot of trouble slowing Mississippi State down, even though the score didn't reflect it that much. If you look at the final, Mississippi State moved the ball pretty consistently throughout that game. I thought that was interesting because Mississippi State's passing game is not as good as Tennessee's. They shut down Tennessee, and then maybe this says a little bit about how realistic it is to take too much from that game. Probably a little bit too about the sort of home and away advantages that everybody's had. They played at Mississippi State, had Tennessee at home. But when you talk about all the teams out there, those teams are kind of the big four, right? You have Tennessee, you have Georgia, in Michigan, you have Ohio State, and sitting in the wings now, you've got TCU, who's undefeated. Clemson still floating around there. Oregon just went down with another loss. USC, I'm trying to remember, drawing a blank, right? They just played, right? But I'm pretty sure they won. I'm just going to, giving away the fact that I don't remember whether they won or not, but I'll confirm that. I'm pretty sure they won, and they're still hanging around. But anyway, you've got sort of the usual suspects. But in terms of teams that I think could actually win a title, it's really just those two Big Ten teams and the two SEC teams. And they destroyed Colorado. I had already forgotten. And so I think the odds of the Pac-12 managing to actually produce a one-loss champion feel low. It's going to have to be USC, and I just feel like USC is going to find a way. With UCLA, Notre Dame, and the championship on the line, they're going to drop one. I don't think Oregon's going to get in with 2 losses over a lot of other, a 1-loss non-champion. So now, you're in a situation where Tennessee probably has the inside track over anyone in the Pac-12. You're going to maybe get TCU out of the Big 12. You might, I don't know who else is really even floating around, right? So, it feels like the loser of Ohio State, Michigan, and then Tennessee possibly are in golden territory. And the one question you could ask is, maybe what happens if LSU beats Georgia in the SEC title. I think if LSU beats Georgia in the SEC title, I will say Georgia should go ahead of Tennessee. They've already won the head-to-head. I'm a big proponent of the fact that, especially in those situations, having to play in the conference championship game for your conference should never itself be a punishment. It doesn't always quite work out that way if it's sort of not an apples to apples thing. But in general, that's sort of the way I've felt. If the two teams are still on relatively equal standing, right? If they've got the same, in that case, they're both one-loss teams. The fact that the most recent loss was the conference championship shouldn't be the thing that knocks you out. And then you'd have an interesting question if LSU were to beat Georgia because it'd be a 2-loss SEC champion. And I don't know how you play them out with everyone else, but it does. Man, it just increasingly feels like a non-conference champion is going to end up in the playoff. It just feels like it's inevitable with how much everybody's beat themselves up. Daniel,
I'm going to try to save you. Let's see if this works. Try one more thing on a different computer or something, I promise. So I think that the playoff thing, it's so funny because we're games under their belt, and it almost feels like talking about the playoffs is premature. And I don't know that it is premature. Like, we should be talking about it now, but it's so up in the air, especially with, like, Oregon was my kind of like, if people were already trying to explain away that the Georgia loss let him in kind of thing. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know either. Yeah. And you're not so choppy that you should hop off, but you are choppy. There's still a little bit to it. So I think it's actually an internet connection thing. I agree with somebody in chat. Yeah. I don't know what you do. And we're going to get to the end of the year and we'll have to figure it out. Bowen, Daniel, Bowen, Noel, I love this. Can I hop on? I can give you 20 minutes on Liberty. I appreciate it. I appreciate it, but maybe we'll pass. By the way, you do actually manage to sound more nerdy on this than any other time I've heard you, which is impressive because Daniel is not a small man. I'm not a small man, and he is much taller than me. Do you want to go ahead and start getting into top 10s? I need probably a second to do mine if you want to find something to espouse on for a second. Or have I lost you again? I've lost him.
With my can come up for air for a little bit.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Okay, so y'all have to deal with a little bit of chop while Josh puts his top 10 together. I'm probably not even going to do one, Josh, with my audio. I wonder if, like, I think everybody is hoping that TCU wins now of the playoffs. It really feels like at this point, if TCU loses a game, that 2 SEC teams and 2 Big Ten teams get in. That's just kind of what I think, and I don't know that it would be unreasonable. Are we going to say that there's a team out there that deserves to be in it if TCU loses it more than Tennessee? I don't think so. I don't think so. And it's funny talking about my internet. Like, I'm on fiber. Like, I probably have better internet than everybody on this call, except for you, Josh. But for some reason, it is choppy. It could be our stream. But I do wonder. Like, I feel like this is the year that if TCU wins out, this is probably the year that everybody's going to point to, like they point to 2014 as being an example of why we need an expanded playoff. But what we need is a 6-team playoff, not a 12-team playoff. And that's where I'm just so disappointed that we expanded this and we corrected so much. The tweet that I had earlier this week was, in a 12-team playoff world, now we have to have Alabama and Clemson in the playoffs because we can't be sure they're not 2 of the best teams in the country, which we know it. We saw it with our eyeballs. We know those aren't two teams that belong playing on the same stage as Georgia this year. And it means that they didn't earn anything in the regular season and they still get to go. That's disappointing to me. But if Clemson has one loss, there's going to be a loser of the Michigan-Ohio State game, then it is kind of a mess, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it will be. They may. I don't know what the committee is going to do in that situation, and I'm actually looking right now, trying to figure out looking at the last, trying to look at the most recent committee rankings. I'm having a hard time getting to pull up, because my computer doesn't want to load. But they don't have any of those teams particularly close, right? So Clemson's sitting at 10th, and TCU, yeah, they've got a good shot, but Tennessee's the odd man out. Oregon was the next one, but they just lost. So LSU was up, then USC, which we think is going to lose again. Then it was Alabama in front of Clemson, who just won. So, yeah, I mean,
And
Clemson
somebody
has
said in the chat that if TCU wins out, the SEC can forget about 2, which I'm assuming they're saying that the loser of the Michigan-Ohio State game is in regardless, which is a little because in my gut on a neutral field, I don't know that I'm picking Ohio State or Michigan over Tennessee. I mean, I would have to think about it. Like, obviously because of resume and the fact they don't have a loss right now, I would rank those 2 ahead. But Michigan and Ohio State have shown me some things that I'm concerned about. And this is, I'll get into this one, Josh, while you're sorting things out. JJ McCarthy.
got my top 10 ready.
Okay. Michigan fans are going to be at me for the rest of the year for my takes on Michigan because they're beating the crap out of really bad teams. But yet again, in a game where they could have tried some things to get him some rhythm, I looked and it was in the fourth quarter. JJ McCarthy had 6.2 yards per attempt and he was 7 for 16. That is not an offense that's going to win you a playoff game. It's just not. And we had the same thing last year. Michigan was like, ugly offense, break off 3 runs, get a pick 6, win by 4 touchdowns. And everybody said, when we picked Georgia win by double digits, people called us crazy. And we were like, this is a bad matchup. And you cannot be a 6.2 yard per attempt team and beat Georgia. It was Alabama last year. It was because they were throwing vertical. And if you don't have a quarterback that can do that, the defenses at Georgia are going to be able to shut your run game down. And so that's all I'm going to say about that. I'm not going to do a top 10. I'll just let you run with yours. It's getting late, and I'll support you as I can.
Sure. And somebody had the idea, and I'm just throwing it out there. Maybe you can throw it in the chat. So as I go through and do my top 10, maybe you could do your number in the chat at the same time. You think you could manage that?
I can try, but as I look at the scores, Arizona's tied with UCLA, and Utah is struggling with Stanford. But yes, I'll try.
Okay. So, and I'll rattle through my top 10 pretty quick, guys. Obviously, I'm struggling this week. My number 1 is Georgia. I've got no reason to drop them. I didn't think they looked completely dominating against Mississippi State, but Mississippi State is a good team this year. And they did handle them pretty darn well. They have one of the best wins in the country over Tennessee, if not the best win in the country. And they continue to play high-level football on offense and on defense, really the only team to do that. My number 2 is Michigan. I think just in terms of consistent performance, Michigan is still in a better place to me than Ohio State. Ohio State is my number 3. Picking between the two is tough. And let's be clear, it's academic. They're going to play each other. The winner is going to be above the other. The question is, how far is the other going to fall? And I'm not sure I'm ready to answer that until I see it. It is a tough blow for Ohio State losing Williams if it's any significant period of time, and I think it probably will be. Without him and Henderson, I think they're set back quite a bit offensively from an offense that's already kind of struggled to find their rhythm and identity. But they have been playing good defense, and I think the general amount of athleticism gives them a higher ceiling than most. Tennessee at number 4 They ran away from Missouri, but that was actually a tough game for a while until they kind of got a lead, and then it just blew open. And so it's a little tough to judge. They are, when clicking, they're the best offense in the country. Defensively, they're still not good. Missouri moved the ball pretty well all day on them. So we're sort of the same old, same old. TCU, I'm having number 5. They got the win. I didn't think they looked pretty in the win. We've talked about all our concerns. They're undefeated. I can't put them any lower than that. And I still have Tennessee ahead of them, but yeah, is what it is. USC behind TCU, same deal. They've got 1 loss. I've not been overly impressed with them. I think the defense has some issues. I think the offense would probably have issues too if they played a defense of higher caliber. I don't think the Pac-12 is playing very good football right now. Next for me is number 7, and that's LSU. This is where you start running out of good teams and good candidates pretty fast. But LSU is doing nothing but win outside that first game, and they're the best 2-loss team in my view. Their win over Alabama is still pretty impressive, even though I'm not sure how good that really is. But the win over them and Ole Miss carries the day for the most part. Still the best resume of anyone else. If they had beaten Florida State, they'd be a lot higher, but I can't just wave away that loss. It is what it is. My number 8 is Alabama. 2 losses. I get that. But again, resumes start falling short pretty quick here. I think Alabama is just not as good a team as we expected them to be. I think they've regressed considerably from earlier in the year, defensively and offensively. Defensively, in spurts, they've been bad. To start the year, they were dominant. Statistically, like 50%, 44% against the run. They've fallen all the way into the 70s in our metrics. They're pushing to 80% pass defense when they've been in like the 60, 70 range. They are getting objectively worse. I'm not sure why. They had a spurt in the second half against Ole Miss where they looked like the team they probably should be, and then it went right back to the start. I think the injury to Bryce Young has really crippled them. I think teams have also figured out kind of how they operate schematically and figured out ways to exploit them, but they're just not an elite team this year. They're just not. They're still better than the others. Clemson at number 9. Look, they've continued to stay in a position to be in the top 10, but they haven't looked pretty doing it. And some of these close wins over bad teams like Syracuse, I can't really excuse it. We people early on wanted to say NC State, Syracuse, all our ranked wins, Wake Forest. A lot of those teams have just continued to lose. We've believed that all year, that it was a scheduling quirk, that those teams were ranked where they were to begin the year, just because we feel like we have to rank someone by default in every conference. But those weren't good teams. They're not good wins. I don't think Clemson is a particularly good team this year. I don't think they would be much more than a 3-loss team if they played in the SEC or the Big Ten. But, 1 loss, I got to put them there. My number 10 is Penn State, just sort of hanging around, taking care of business. I don't think they're a perfect team, but when you look down the rankings, they're just kind of the next one up to me in terms of where it falls, who I want to put somewhere. They had a big win today. They looked impressive. They look more like a complete team. I'm not 30-0 over a good Maryland team. And I know a lot of Big Ten fans try to say Maryland is a great team. I think Maryland is a solid team. But when you look at who they've won and who they lost to and how they've done it, I think they're just kind of an average or above average solid team, a bit like Arkansas in the SEC maybe. But, beating a team like that 30-0 is impressive when you see LSU can't go out and rout a bad Arkansas team, right? And that's just where college football is this year. So that's my top 10, Georgia to Penn State. If you disagree with me, 7 to 10, feel free to say in the comment who you think it should be, because I guarantee you trying to map it out at that point is pretty tough. And yeah, it really feels like we're headed for an absolute mess in the playoff.
Through my top 10, hopefully my audio holds up. Georgia number 1, Ohio State number 2, Michigan number 3. I do think that Tennessee, who I have at number 4, I think I would probably pick them on a neutral site versus Michigan or Ohio State. I think it would be a track meet in any of those games. Somebody pointed out in the chat that Tennessee's opponents are 51-30, and I think Michigan's are like 30-something and 50. It's the problem with me is Michigan could be elite, Ohio State could be elite, and it's just that they haven't had the opportunity to show it yet. TCU number 5. I'm concerned that team is a little bit of fool's gold, but I am impressed with them going on the road and beating a Texas team that I think is better than people want to give them credit. LSU number 6. I don't think LSU is great. This is another one where I don't think any of these teams are great. I like the rest of my top 10. None of these teams, they could lose to the number 30 team, and I wouldn't be surprised. LSU number 6, I think they got a really just huge favorable thing with KJ Jefferson not playing today. I think they lose that game if he plays. USC at number 7, and I think the USC would probably lose legitimate top 15 teams, but I got to put them there because of their record. Started off slow with Colorado, ended up winning. But USC is, somebody says Tennessee is meh. Everybody is meh after the top 3, honestly. But Tennessee beat they put up 66 on a good terrible, but not because of their defense. They're just a bad offense, and Tennessee scored 66. Alabama number 8. I think Alabama has a ton of talent, and they have 2 coaches that they need to send elsewhere. Clemson number 9, and I'm again not sold on Clemson, but they won today. They had a lot of players out unexpectedly. Still won today against a team that can score some points. And I've got Penn State at number 10. Penn State's going to finish the year 10-2. Not a great schedule. Lost the 2 good teams on their schedule, but didn't have the knucklehead game. Sean Clifford today, though, this is my concern. 6 yards per attempt versus Maryland. That's a bad number. And that's why everybody was asking earlier, Sean Clifford or cranberry sauce. And we're picking cranberry sauce because 6.0 versus Maryland, that's tough.
Yeah, and I'll leave it with one more comment. It's interesting. We talk about some of these elite teams, right? There's the storylines with Ohio State, storylines with Michigan, storylines with Alabama, Georgia. We haven't talked about Georgia as much as we probably should because all Georgia has done is gone out and take care of business, but often not in a like 50-0 dramatic fashion, right? Like this Mississippi State game, final score-wise, they beat them a little worse than Alabama did. Even though I think they were more consistent in the game and in a lot of facets. That's kind of how it turned out. The one that I think we've given almost too much of a pass nationally on is Clemson. We've talked before about the coordinator changes, promoting from within and whatnot. I mean, it's everybody wants to talk about Alabama's coordinator situations and how low they're playing relative to the talent level. Man, the past couple of years at Clemson, I'm not sure why they're getting as much of a pass as they are. Because that team is too talented to be at the level they're at. They are not a great team. Offensively, they're not a great team. They've got clearly have some skill players that can play because like Louisville, they exploded on them at times, but that's all it seems like it is. And I don't know fully what's going on there or what their future is going to be, but that's one thing I want to note, that Clemson just keeps hanging around in the top 10. They keep winning games, but I feel like because they only have one loss, they're getting a little too much of a pass. It feels like they haven't failed yet this season. But in terms of performing up to expectations on a weekly basis, they probably deserve as much criticism as anyone because they are not performing up to their 2015, 2016 standard by any means.
Josh, is it because everybody
I mean,
else is flagging too? Like we take Clemson out of that equation, all the teams past number 3, and honestly, there's still questions about number 2 and number 3. Is it just because Clemson, along with these other teams, somebody's got to be there, and may as well be Clemson or 9-1 and whatever?
Yeah, you may be right. The reality is that we all kind of follow the top teams more than anything else in college football, and there's enough other top teams ahead of them that are bad that everybody thought were going to be good to get the conversation piece. Clemson wasn't great last year. They weren't really expected to be the top 2 team in the country this year. And so it's like, well, they seem like they're a little better offensively. Now they're worse defensively. Nobody really talks about that. And people just like, all right, that's fine, whatever. And everybody else that has more of a spotlight gets more attention. But looking the way they look relative to their competition level in the ACC, given what they're playing versus what Alabama and their struggles are playing, or what Ohio State's played when they've struggled, the Clemson competition level is not quite the same. So, it's not ideal.
Josh, as we wrap it up, I got to lean into one.
And I'll just say last point on that, right? Notre Dame 35-14, right? Like we're critical of Ohio State for struggling with a half to Notre Dame. Clemson was blown out by Notre Dame. And I know people talked about it,
Notre
but
Dame
not
barely
very
beat.
much. Right. They beat. Yeah. I mean, that was really bad. And it wasn't a major headline. So I just think that's kind of interesting.
So I want to touch on this one thing or have you comment on it before we wrap up. Illinois is this team that a lot of people have held up as an example of elite Big Ten defenses. And I know we got a lot of really good, nice Big Ten fans in the chat tonight, but I think we saw today, and Aiden O'Connell didn't have a great day, but Purdue still put up 31 points. The Big Ten defenses, in my opinion, because a lot of them are ranked highly right now, are just a reflection of really bad quarterback play and really bland offensive football that's being played in the Big Ten right now. Tell me why.
Yeah, I had even tweeted about this, and I don't think I can find the tweet at the moment. But my point was when you look at total defense statistics, right? It's good to have team ranked high, but the way stats work is when you play a game, somebody generates an offensive stat, and that creates a defensive stat for the opponent. And we're at the point now where you've played mostly conference games. So if a conference has really, really good stats on one side, they are necessarily really, really bad on the other. And if you go down and you look at top defenses, number 1 is Michigan. This is yards per game, okay? 1 is Michigan. 2 is Illinois. 4 is Ohio State. 7 is Iowa. 9 is Minnesota. Like, it's too many. You shouldn't have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the top 10. And the thing is, like, I know they're good teams and all, but it's not just like you have a lot of top 30, top 40 ones, right? And that's not atypical, right? It's not atypical to have 2 or 3 very, very highly ranked ones, Georgia and Alabama or something. But the only way you get to that point where you have that many that are top 10 is if no one on the other side of the ball is ever moving the ball. And yeah, I think it has to, at some level, it has to be inflating the defensive statistics. And again, if you talk yards per play defense, the top 3 are Iowa, Michigan, and Illinois. I'm not saying they're not really good, but you have, Illinois ranked ahead of Georgia. I just can't view that as anything being more than schedule and quality of opponent. Having seen both of them play, and I'm not saying Illinois is bad, but Georgia's better. And I think it's, you go down and you look at the schedule list, right? Indiana, Wisconsin, Iowa, Minnesota, Nebraska. To this point, they played a lot of teams that have really struggled offensively at times. In the last couple of weeks, they played Michigan State and Purdue, not great teams, and they give up 23 and 31. And so, you can't help but walk away from this and sort of feel like if they played, if they were playing teams that were a lot more competent or just reasonably competent, they'd be a lot higher. And the thing is, I think Michigan and Ohio State are really good defensively, but when you talk pure statistics, I feel like it's at such a level that it's got to be skewing things. And if you feel like that's totally unfair, I'll make the point. If you ever look at total offense statistics in college football, just in terms of yards per play and things like that, what you will generally find is that there are a lot of G5 teams at the top of that list. Like right now, North Texas is number 6, UCF's number 7, UTSA is number 12, and especially quarterbacks tend to be very, very high. And it's because really a lot of top offensive statistics are generated more by playing bad defense than they are by being good offensively. And right now, there is an argument that the Big Ten's offenses are just bad. And I think there are some really good defenses, but the offenses are so bad that it's hard for me to pick out the actual elite defenses from the merely good ones. I think Illinois' defense is very good. I don't think they're much better than very good. But they've been made to look literal top 3 elite better than Georgia statistically as a result of the Big Ten defenses. And then makes me really have to question what in the world are we actually looking at across the board, especially given, for example, Michigan and Maryland did not play a P5 team out of conference. So the only thing we're judging them by is who they played in conference. And it's really, really hard. There's no right way to do it. other than to be a little skeptical and bear in mind that things might change. I'm not saying they're bad, but I'm just saying you don't know what you don't know, and we don't know.
Yeah, and the issue for me is because people keep talking. There's a lot of people in the chat talking about how Tennessee is a one-trick pony. And Tennessee struggled with Missouri today, and they're not impressed. Tennessee won that game 66 to 24. 66 to 24. They beat Missouri more than Michigan beat Maryland by today. And the issue is when we're talking about teams that can win a championship, not conferences that have generally good quality. And by good, I mean bowl eligible quality. When we're talking about teams that can win a national championship, you need to be elite on one side of the ball. You don't have to be elite on both sides of the ball. I think Ohio State's offense is elite. I know Georgia might be elite on both sides of the ball. I know Tennessee is elite on one side of the ball. I don't know on either side of the ball. Their defense could have given up 50 last year to Georgia if they wanted. They ran for 3.4 yards per carry against Georgia in that game. So the issue is if you're playing and dominating a bunch of teams with your defense are terrible offensively, you might still have a dominant defense. We don't know. And that's what we're saying. We don't know because you could be 2017 Clemson, who played nobody and wasn't great in the playoffs, or you can be 2016 Clemson, who played nobody and won the national championship. We don't know. And this is not an SEC rant because I think the SEC's got their own issues.
Yeah. Again,
LSU's going to win the West, and they're not great.
We were talking about Alabama and LSU and all those, right? Alabama's not an elite team this year. If Alabama right now played in the playoffs, they would get walked.
Yeah. Ohio State would walk Alabama. So this is not some pro SEC thing. This is you can't beat what Michigan's schedule has been. Some of the worst teams in the country and puff your chest. This is the same problem with Oregon in the Pac-12 until tonight. We don't know anything about the Pac-12 because they've lost to everybody they played out of conference. So, no, I think the SEC is down too. I think that Tennessee is a legitimately good team, but I think like Kentucky sucks this year. They're usually pretty good. Arkansas without KJ Jefferson, they suck. Auburn sucks. A&M sucks. Like the SEC is down too. So I'm not doing that. Y'all don't come at me about that. I'm just saying this whole we've got elite defenses in the Big 12 when we're running fullbacks and power I and 3 yards in a cloud of dust ain't it. Josh, anything else before we wrap it up?
Yeah, Stephen Light had a super chat where he said Big Ten is a good conference, but it's an entire train wreck in the West with a bunch of 4-3 teams, and the East is very variable. So you're correct. And I appreciate and it's a Big Ten fan, I think, just trying to show that there's a level head with all this. Look, everybody, I say this a lot, right? If everybody sucks, no one sucks. Right. It's a variable sport, and everyone can't suck. If everyone sucks, it just means everybody's making life. Every game, the other team is making life hard for you and vice versa to some degree. But I think the problem has been the inconsistencies we see. The problem has been the lack of execution across the board. I think quarterback play is what way down this year. A lot of it is due to the fact that a lot of the better quarterbacks have been hurt. And that's really limited things. I think wide receiver play has been a big driver for quality in college football in recent years. And I think wide receiver play is way down. Ohio State was supposed to have an all-time receiving core, and they got kind of banged up off and on throughout the whole season. They still seem to be the best unit, but they haven't been what they were supposed to be. Obviously, Tennessee's receivers are really good, and that's made them be very effective. In Georgia, I don't know, the receivers are good, but the tight end room is so insane, it's kind of covered for it. And when you start getting outside that, you run out of a list pretty quickly, right? So I think there are a lot of reasons for it being the way it is. But the reality is it is a bit of a mess this year. And I think we, there are probably going to be people that want to spin it, sort of twist this into an argument that you need a 12-team playoff because, look, everybody's so much parity. One, I think, again, that devalues the fact, right, that Alabama lost to LSU. Alabama would just be in. And a lot of these games wouldn't matter, and it's kind of what keeps things exciting to the end of the season. Two, I'll circle back to the point that Yeah, it may be that these SEC teams are all pretty good and beating each other up, and yeah, maybe they would all win their round one matchups, but Georgia still and Tennessee are still going to crush most of them with time to prepare. Same deal with Ohio State and whatnot. I still think you've got a handful of teams that are going to win it. I just don't know exactly which ones they are, but I think we're going to find out at the end of the year. There are 2 or 3 teams that are just a total cut above everybody else, just like it always is. It's just that next tier, as I've said, that B tier, that tier that's usually like teams 3 through 8. I don't feel like it exists. You've got teams 1 through 3, and then everybody else. And it's not that the second tier is bigger; it's that the third tier is bigger and swallowed the second tier, and the second tier doesn't exist. So that's kind of my last point. I'm about out of gas. So unless you got anything on your end, Daniel, we can probably wrap it up. Thanks everybody for showing up.
Yep. That's it for me too. Sorry about the audio. It'll be better next week. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week. God bless.